Judas? Is it with a kiss that you betray the Son of Man?
Hello, my name is Robbie. On here, I am Templar Knight. Every person who believes in God but does not attend a church has a story why. But whenever two or more people gather in God's name, He is there. So this is church. Welcome. I'm glad that you're here. The story of Judas. This has been a difficult challenge for me because information on Judas is lacking. And I'm doing everything I can to put the pieces together to give you an accurate description of who this man was, what he did, and why. All I can ask is that you are open-minded. Most of the information I have is from the Bible. Some is not, and I will be sure to make it clear which is and is not. But if we're going to learn who this guy was, we need more information. So tonight, we are actually going to begin the talk of Judas. And I wanted to break it down into just the time of who he was before he met Jesus. See, when Jesus started his ministry, he started it by gathering his disciples. And it talks about how he walked along the Sea of Galilee and he asked fishermen to put aside their nets in their boats and to join him. Now, having a rabbi invite you to learn from them was a huge honor. It's like basically free education and the key to a better life. So it was not something you would turn down. Especially with the charisma that Jesus had, just that aura that he put out. When Jesus asked you to follow him, you did. So that's the story we hear about how we found a handful of our disciples. But the Bible doesn't really state how Jesus found Judas. There are a few hints, but let's say that there's a little bit of insight into who he was. The first thing we can find out that gives us definitive information about him was his name, Judas Iscariot. Now, having a last name or a surname isn't always as common as it was now. They were normally given to people to help them differentiate themselves from someone else with the same name, almost like a nickname. And Judas was the son of Simon Iscariot, which translated means he was from the town of Kerioth. It's in the southern region of Judea. Well, all the other disciples were from Galilee. So Judas was kind of a foreigner. He didn't grow up with these guys. They weren't people he saw around town. Now, mind you, Judas was a pretty common name in biblical times because it meant praised, or the praised one, or praise God, depending on how you interpret it. But either way, it had a powerful meaning. In the nation of Israel, all the lands that were conquered and claimed by King David, Jewish was the most common religion until Jesus Christ came along and planted the seeds for Christianity. So there was even another Judas disciple. He was Judas, the son of James. In the book of Mark, he was even called Thaddeus. But it wasn't uncommon for people to have multiple names. Even Simon was called Peter. Peter was called Simon. Sorry, I'm wandering. But Judas's name, Iscariot, means that he was from Kerioth, while all the others were from Galilee. This already made him a bit of an outsider. But they all formed the group of the disciples that were following the Rabbi Jesus. But where did they cross paths? Because who was this Judas before he was a disciple? Well, to figure that out, we have to bring in another well-known character from the Bible, John the Baptist. Now, it doesn't clearly state that Judas was a follower of John the Baptist when Jesus came to get baptized. Again, there's not a great deal of information about Judas in the Bible, nor in sources outside of the Bible. But there are people far smarter than me that can piece together a series of events far better than I can. And if they believe that Judas was studying under John the Baptist before he met Jesus, with the information I've read from them, I'm willing to accept it. Of all of these ideas of who Judas was before he met Jesus, it makes a lot of sense. It's also assumed that Judas came from a well-off family. He was very smart with money. He was very frugal. And he was aware of the impact that money has. Even in this day and age, people who have a lot of money are often very stingy and keep a hold of it, whereas people who are not used to having money are quicker to share it and spend it. Also, Judas was studying under a great teacher before Jesus, which shows he was smart. He knew his Torah. So you had to have that memorized as a child so that when you grew up, you could teach from it. So he already had the first several books of the Bible memorized. Like me, in biblical days, I would not be allowed to teach because I don't have the Bible memorized. But I have Google, so I can get the information I need. It's also assumed that Judas was good at putting money to use, sometimes in shady ways. Almost similar to politicians and wealthy businessmen today, Judas knew how to make money grow. I would say that not all of his profits were on the up and up. If Judas was said to have a weakness, it would be his greed. And as the Bible states, that he still struggled with his greed long after becoming a disciple of Jesus. So clearly, this was a deep-seated issue for him to have met Jesus and still have this struggle. Now, I don't want to paint Judas in the same light like he was the only one who struggled. The disciples were all men, normal men. Granted, they tried to be better because they knew Jesus, but these were not men who were brought up in a church as Jesus was. They had normal lives, normal jobs. And when Jesus found them, they had their normal vices. Like the brothers James and John, in the Bible, they're referred to as the sons of thunder, which is a really cool nickname. But they were called that because they had a very short and very violent temper. Even Simon, or Peter, drew a weapon and attacked a servant of the high priest when they came to arrest Jesus, cutting off his ear. This dude swung a sword at some other dude's head. Temper, violence, anger. Even Matthew was a tax collector before following Jesus, and tax collectors were known to be shady and little crooked, extorting money from people. So all I'm saying is, these disciples, they started out as normal guys, trying their best until they met Jesus. But even after being with Jesus and learning from him, old habits still die hard. Sorry, I'm moving into next week's lessons about the disciples. So, back to Judas before Jesus. So as far as Judas in the early years, nothing is really known for certain. Only ideas and logic and reading between the lines. And unfortunately, we only have 4 books that are considered to be the truth, considered to be orthodox, and that were put into the Bible to tell the story of the life of Jesus. And they were all written at earliest 40 to 120 years after Jesus died. Each one telling the same stories, but from a different perspective. See, the book of Matthew, it focuses on what Jesus was teaching. The book of Mark is more focused around Jesus, his role as a healer, as an exorcist. Mark is also where we get a lot of information about Jesus and his interactions with the disciples. Luke talks more about Jesus and family, and Luke has a lot more of the parables. A parable is the stories that Jesus would tell with a good moral teaching. Luke talked more about those than any of the other books. And then there's the book of John, which uses a lot of metaphor and artistic language to draw a picture, whereas the other books are more of a historical text. Honestly, the book of John's my favorite because I'm a visual person, but the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're called the Synoptic Gospels because of how much they share. I found this when I was researching today, and I wanted to show you this chart. It's a little confusing to read at first, but these are the stories and how much they have in common. You have the book of Luke, Matthew, and Mark. Now the purple is information that all three of them share. The blue is the stuff that the book of Matthew and Luke share. The red is the stuff Matthew and Mark share. The teal, the green, the brown, those are sections that are specific and only talked about in those books. So if you look at those, the book of Mark, over 75% of the book of Mark, you will find those stories in Luke and Matthew. All three of these books come together to tell you the story of Jesus. That's why they're called the Synoptic Gospel. It's a big church word, but I wanted to show what that meant. I always find it interesting how little the book of Mark and the book of Luke have in common that Matthew didn't touch on. But we could talk about all of the fun things at plagiarism and just copying other people's notes, but okay. So we have the three synoptic gospels, the history texts. We have the book of John, which divulges a little more into spiritual realm and more showy words, more visual learning. And together, the Bible gives us those four books to get the truth. And it is with great caution that I'm learning from other scholars and books. Mostly for information I've read about in the Bible, and a little bit of stuff that has a different opinion on who Judas was before he met Jesus. And of course, I'm taking all this information with a grain of salt. But it is very interesting salt. There is one thing that I've been struggling with, and I believe Judas was already on a path of learning long before he ever became a disciple. How could he not? He was following John the Baptist. While the others were fishermen or tradesmen and had normal jobs, he was already on the path of learning to maybe one day become a rabbi himself. Now, yeah, he had his vices and he had his greed. Growing up with money would always hinder him. But he had already learned stuff that the others had not. Coming from money, he was brought up different. He was from a different land. Obviously, why he was an outsider. And according to the Gospel of Judas, he had an attitude that basically said, hey, I'm better than you. Now, mind you, the Gospel of Judas has not been proven to be true, nor was it chosen to be in the Bible. But it constantly speaks of Judas feeling as though he and Jesus have a special relationship above and beyond what the others say, what the other disciples have, that he is better and more important than them. And I can't help but wonder if this rich kid from a foreign land looks down on these blue-collared workers. Kind of makes me wonder. But if there's one thing that I am certainly learning while studying these series, the history books were written by those who won. And the books that were written at earliest 40 to 120 years after Judas betrayed Jesus, they might put him a little more emphasis on him being a villain. In the years before the gospel was written, it was only spoken word. So who was Judas before Jesus? He was a sinner, like all of us. But he was a sinner trying to follow the path God put before him. And then Jesus, the Savior of the world, shows up and is baptized by his teacher. And he told Judas to follow. So Judas left and became a disciple of Jesus Christ.
Judas, is it with a kiss that you betray the Son of Man?